I want to do a little bit of an overview of what you're gonna experience today. If you've never done a design thinking session, that's going to be later on in the day, but we have to give you some ammunition here to figure out what you want to do in design thinking. So we're going to start, with some overview of, okay, who is AIS and why do you even care about any of this? And why have you stepped out and kind of taken a role in looking at some of the solutions that are around that. So we're going to start with kind of who we are and why this is important to us, what we've discovered, and so we'll be introducing members of our staff through this process to kind of step through that. We're also going to take a look at the actual architecture of what we built. That was built with in design thinking sessions like you'll do later on today with many of we had companies, all size companies, AIS as an advisory organization. We have a lot of smaller mid-sized companies that are members. So we had participants from there. We had some members, some participants that aren't even members of AIS in design thinking sessions, some of the larger companies. We had, I think at one point, representation from at least 15 different state departments of insurance. And so they all committed time to come in and give us insight. And the NAIC's been great. Scott and Denise are here today. They've pretty much been to every one of these. And so we've tried to bring in the perspective of industry, of the regulatory environment, and then also of vendors, people who you interact with, reinsurers, brokers, other people in our environment. And that's kind of expanding on us, as the commissioner was kind of referencing. That's kind of growing in our world, people that are around data that we are interacting with. So we brought some of those folks. We're in design thinking sessions. So we're going to take a look at that architecture that was basically built from the way we do things at AIS. And then also we're going to talk a little bit about something that's just as important, which is the data standard. We as an industry have not coalesced around a warehousing standard that can move us forward. So this technology facilitates bringing a data standard into our industry. So that's one of the reasons we think it's important. But then overall, as the commissioner was talking about data strategy and what data strategy you can kind of think about starting to look to in your companies. You might have internal data strategies. We experience a lot of companies that their data strategy is, I just put in a new policy admin system. That's my data strategy. Okay, that's not a data strategy. That's a little piece, but it's not a strategy. And so how do you grow that, even as a small company? How do you look at your data strategy internally versus what's going to be going on in the industry and a data strategy that's responsive to that? So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then this afternoon, after lunch, we're going to do a design thinking session. Now, this is going to be smushed, okay? Usually design thinking sessions, when you do them in kind of the traditional space, can be a couple of days worth of work. Usually at least one full day. And you're bringing in people inside your organizations. A lot of times people do it internally, but right now you have a lot of the innovation labs and things like that inside of IBM, Deloitte, other places. They use this technique to kind of brainstorm together. But the key around that is collaboration and empathy. Okay, you've got to understand and start to work together. And our industry is really great at that in some places and not so good at it in others, right? We have some really great trade organizations like NAMIC and APCIA. They're good at coalescing around industry, around policy issues that happen, right? We generally have pretty good input as an industry into how those things are kind of getting formulated. But we don't necessarily do that around other things in our industry. And we, data, mine, like the seagulls and other kind of activities where, because of antitrust, which is a legitimate concern, we don't talk about those things a lot. So, design thinking sessions is meant to break down that barrier and to start collaboratively working through problems or issues that we all have. And you'll see how we did that in design and working with IBM on this through the Hyperledger Fabric to build openIDL. And openIDL is Open Insurance Data Lake. So that's where we are. And so we're going to start this out I'm going to call up, we're going to just kind of interview and talk. If you have any questions, just jump in. Ask anything you want of us. I'll have time later on for questions, but if there's just something on your mind and you want an answer to it, wave your hand, stand up, shout at me. I'll be looking around, and even though I'm halfway blind and probably should be wearing glasses, I'll probably see you. So start this out. Joan, will you come up and join me? So I'm going to start this out like a little bit of an interview, and I'm going to ask Joan some very probing questions because she doesn't like to talk about herself, but quite frankly, she's a really impressive woman. And I've worked for a couple throughout my career at the state of Florida and some other places, people that just impacted you. And I know you didn't expect me to say that, but you truly have impacted me in a really great way. I've learned every day from this woman. So I think all of us at AAI can say we learn every day from Joan. But Joan is our COO, our Senior Vice President and COO at AAIS. And I know that some of you are aware, but will you start with just what your experience was with the internet? Because we parallel a lot of what we're doing in the development of blockchain technology as the internet of value to what happened when you were working on the internet. So.
Well, my background, and I apologize for my voice, but I'm in recovery from my granddaughter's cold. So early on in my career, I started out in technology. I was with the University of California, and I was hired because the ARPANET was turning over technology to the National Science Foundation, and every regional area was creating a regional network, such as Northern California, Southern California. I was hired to be the network administrator for the campus, and as well as I was the technical chair of the Bay Area Regional Research Network. So I was there at the beginning, day one, when the NSFNet was formed, and which eventually became the internet. And it was an amazing thing to watch happen. And the key concepts of how the internet grew, we have tried to incorporate those in how we hope openIDL will grow as well. What we saw was government, industry, education, vendors coming together and working collaboratively to build a network. There was a baseline network that had been provided through the ARPANET and the Stanford Research Institute. But nobody knew what was going to happen after that. The way the internet grew was through the passion of the people who were there. So the first thing that everybody thought, this internet thing, well, we're going to use that to transfer files. We think that that's what it's all about. But then someone would come from a new startup or a student maybe, or somebody from the Stanford Research Institute, and they would say, we think this might support electronic mail. So maybe we'll go over here and we'll work on this electronic mail thing, and we'll see if that'll ever take off. And I was telling the folks I had dinner with last night, kind of something that was really fun is I was in the working group. The internet was built by the Internet Engineering Task Force, so we had a number of working groups that were working on these technologies. And I was there when Tim Berners-Lee came in, and he said, I've got this application that helps physicists share information, and I really want to just have it work on top of this, off of the internet, and I need some standards and some protocols. And so he started talking about, you can type in http:// and all of these characters here, and then you can get to a page. And we said, oh no, that'll never work. I mean, nobody will put up with typing that whole thing in. And he said, well, I got to get going. I've got to make this happen, and I need a group of people that will work with me to make this happen. And so a bunch of folks said, okay, I will, and this working group formed. And they built the World Wide Web. And we're still typing in that URL. But why? Because what was important was getting to the web pages. And people were willing to put up with that URL, at least for now, because we were going to do this iteratively. We're going to get a group of people that have a great idea. We're going to get a version of this application out. We're going to learn about how it's working. We might change a little bit. and then we're going to just keep making it better and better and better. And someday we may get rid of the URL, but for now, we now have pages that connect all over the world. We are able to run commerce on top of it, because that's what was important to the people using the system, right? Through the use of the system, we heard that the URL isn't really all that important to us as long as we can conduct business over the system. So that's how we've tried to incorporate a lot of this into the openIDL. It's collaborative. We're looking for people who have a passion for solving problems. We've provided that baseline platform. And so now what we want to do is work with everyone in the industry, say, what are your highest priorities? That's design thinking. Can we do this iteratively? We won't get it right the first time. We'll need to improve it over time. And so it's that experience that we tried to bring into everything we're doing today and on the openIDL.
Right. Okay, let's move over here to our first screen. Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about who we are as AAIS and why we actually would care about moving the industry forward in this. So talk to us a little bit about our foundational principles at AAIS and how that forms in the NAIC model laws.
So we kind of had an existential crisis about 8 years ago. We had a new leadership team come in, and we said, well, why are we an advisory organization? What does that mean? Because we had not been working in the organization for the last 30 years. And frankly, what we found is a lot of people in the organization didn't know why we were an advisory organization. As we talked to carriers, as we talked to even many regulators, they didn't. They just, well, advisory organizations are.
I didn't know.
Yeah, exactly. You were a regulator, exactly. So we started digging, and we found the NAIC model law that specifies what an advisory organization can do. So we are here because the NAIC decided that we needed an organization to serve as the bridge between carriers and regulators in the collection of data, the creating of rating factors, the creating of rating algorithms for reporting, for statistical reporting. And there, if you go into the model law, there's, I don't know, about 24 things where it says this is exactly what you do as an advisory organization. And then there's a bunch of here are things you can't do as well in the law. And so this law has been enacted in all 50 states and 2 additional jurisdictions. And there are 2 national advisory organizations. One is for-profit, and one is not-for-profit. We're the not-for-profit advisory organization. We've always been not-for-profit. And so that helped us go back and ask ourselves, okay, now we know what an advisory organization is supposed to do, but based on the fact that we're not-for-profit, they were member-focused, not shareholder-focused, but our members matter, how should we deliver these services to the industry? And one of the first things that Robin helped us to understand is that the regulators are part of our membership, right? We don't exist without the regulators. We need to go back to our roots and say, how did we come about? Who are we supposed to serve? Well, we're supposed to serve the regulators as well as our members. We have over 700 members, and we serve them, but we need to bring the community back together. We need to get back to serving as that bridge between the carriers and the regulators, and then deliver the products and services that we've been asked to provide through the model law.
And so, you know, you've talked about, so 8 years ago, we had a new CEO come in, and pretty much the leadership team that's at AAIS now has come in pretty soon after that. And in that process, we changed the way AAIS worked. Mm-hmm. And so let's talk a little bit about how we work now, because it really is impactful into the profile and what we're talking about and design thinking and how we actually move forward on this project. So let's talk a little bit about Agile and what that means inside our organization.
Yep. So Agile is the way we work at AAIS. When the new leadership team came in, we again had to talk about how are we going to serve our members going forward. And we can't do things the way we've done them in the past. We know that the market is changing. It's very dynamic now. It's going to change in ways that we can't foresee. So how are we going to operate in this new world? And we had to move away from a very traditional way of rolling out products, the way we planned our projects, So how are we going to develop that flexibility, that speed, that delivery, that accountability and transparency to our members? Some of us who came from a technology background were aware of a new management technique called Agile. It came from the technology organizations trying to help them manage very large projects, but to break out of the traditional bottlenecks that people were experiencing in IT, and the fact that real value very often didn't come out of a project. You'd get to the end of a project and everybody said, well, this really didn't do what we wanted it to do. So we looked at Agile and we said, can we become an Agile organization? Not just an Agile technology group, but the entire organization. How can we deliver our products faster? How can we deliver value? Not just that we delivered, 20 forms. What needs to be in these 20 forms? How do we challenge everybody in our organization to focus on that value? So we took Agile as a methodology, and you can go out and Google it, and you're going to find all sorts of information on it. There are consultants, there are tools that you can use to be an agile technology organization. There are now many consulting firms that are going out and bringing Agile in to other areas. So my daughter happens to work for one of those consulting companies, and she followed her mom's recommendation. So I was so proud. But she is bringing Agile into CVS and Aetna through their merger. Her job is to get an Agile approach to work throughout the entire organization as they go through this merger. So it's moved far outside of the technology area. It is a way organizations are working, and we feel it's critical for us in order to deliver what the industry needs.
Right. So let's talk, we've touched on the design thinking and then the how, but how did that extend to this project and how we worked through this project?
So with the openIDL, we didn't start saying we wanted to develop a blockchain network. We used our Agile techniques and design thinking, and we posed a very different question, and Robin's going to go through that exercise with all of you today. We said, what is the problem that we're all experiencing around data? AIS knew that we needed to get more data from our carriers in order to develop new products. And to improve the products that we have today, maybe provide greater rating granularity or data that feeds into that. But as we would talk to our members, they'd say, that data, we can't share that. That's really important, and we can't just give you lots of data anymore. The world has changed. But we also knew that state regulators and others were struggling to get the data they need, the data calls that were mentioned earlier. I need an answer for the governor, and I can't get it. So we knew that the regulators weren't happy, and we talked to the carriers, and they said, this, regulatory reporting is such a burden. And we had one carrier at our meeting that said, I've now got 30 staff dedicated to responding to regulatory data calls. That's expensive. It's time consuming. And we don't get anything back. We know these really great reports are coming out inside, maybe a state Department of Insurance, but we never get access to it. So we said, great, how do we solve that problem? Again, recognizing that we can't apply the same solutions and solve this problem. If there was something that existed today, we would already be using it to solve this problem. So we went through a design thinking exercise, and we decided that what we needed was a new way of gathering information, not necessarily sharing data, but how do we share information? And when we do that, we need to make sure that the data is secure. The carriers have a lot of responsibility to keep their data secure. They want transparency in the way that data is used. Today, carriers see that their data goes out, it can go out to an advisory organization. They don't know how it's used. They don't know how it gets used in new products that they might be buying back. So they want transparency in that full life cycle of their data. And for all of us, but most importantly for the regulatory community, is there needs to be an audit trail. There's a requirement to report regulatory data, and maybe that's going to expand as data calls increase and maybe go into required data. So how do we audit that? And when we looked at all the technologies that were out there, traditional database technologies weren't going to solve that problem. It just doesn't have the security, and the transparency and the audit trail. So that, through design thinking, we as a group said we all feel the pain. Now, we have empathy, right? The carriers have empathized with the regulators. Oh, I get it. You get these requests from your legislature. You didn't just do this because you felt like it. And the carriers said, we'd really like to share in the output of what you're developing. So we'd probably be happy to do this. And for AIS, we explained to everybody, we develop products. A lot of the community had forgotten that we develop products and we need data to do that. So we looked at blockchain technology as a possible solution to that. But we didn't start there. We started with the problem. What is the problem we're all experiencing and how are we going to solve that together going forward? We did a trial. So I think we had our first design thinking session in, I don't know, March maybe, something like that. Well, yeah.
18.
So we started the development of the openIDL in late May, and then we demonstrated the system in August at an NAIC meeting. So it was 6 months. I mean, from design thinking to the first iteration of the solution. And that's really critical to Agile, right? We're not going to solve everything with this first platform. We came out with a platform, and guess what? It wasn't really what we wanted. It met a lot of the needs that we had, but we said, we're really going to make this an industry-wide solution. We need to pivot. We need to do something a little bit different based on what we've learned by working with our large community. And so in August, we then started on a revision to that platform. And we went through 2 or 3 revisions, and we finished with the last version of the platform in December. And we are very comfortable that that is the stable platform that needs to move forward as a solution that we all build on.
In that process, we had to work with a lot of different people to kind of get through to build this internet of value and the partnerships that helped us bring value into the platform itself. So that first level is kind of the tool, the initial tool we use. Can you talk a little bit about why did we choose IBM Linux Hyperledger Fabric?
Yep. I would say first we selected Hyperledger Fabric. And this goes back to our commitment to open source. And again, I know a lot of you are probably familiar with the open source community, but for those of you who are not, if you start with the internet, everything that makes the internet run is open source. There is a not-for-profit organization that brings together people. They create standards and solutions, and they're available to anybody to build a product or on top of it, commercial or open, free to everybody, right? So that model works when you're building a network, right? We're not building a system for a company, we're building a network for an industry. So if you think about that open source model, that eventually made it into operating systems. Everybody that was building the internet was using some version of Unix. It was expensive, it was inefficient to have 6, 8 different versions of Unix out there. So a community came together and just said, we're going to create an open source version. We can all use it, and we're just not going to keep reinventing the wheel 8 different ways and incurring that overhead. So that's where the Linux Foundation came about, was it's an open source version of an operating system, and more than 80% of the servers on the internet run on top of Linux. And you can download it for free and use it and build things on top of it. Hyperledger was developed by IBM, so they invested millions of dollars in creating a blockchain platform that they then gave to the Linux Foundation and said, make this open source. Because the value is not in this blockchain technology, the value is what people are going to build on top of that. So Hyperledger was given to the Linux Foundation. There's a community that continues to build that technology platform, and that is at the core of openIDL. It's open source, and AIS doesn't have to build the technology. We have thousands of programmers all around the world who care about Hyperledger and they work on it every day. And it's been kind of fun because every time we were doing openIDL, and we'd say, oh, we really need it to do this. And every time we said that, it came out in the next release of Hyperledger because everybody else in the world who was using Hyperledger said, we really need it to do this. And so it rolled out very quickly. So it's been a great journey with open source software.
Right. And then the other kind of people that we've really worked with is around the ecosystem, right? So let's talk a little bit about kind of the working groups, the idea of how we're bringing those people together. Because AIS won't always be the leader of this. In fact, we're looking for ways to give it, here, take it, and other people need to own what they are interested in it. But talk a little bit about the people we've worked with so far in that structure.
So we've structured the way openIDL works, again, very similar to how the internet has come together, how the Linux Foundation and Hyperledger work. So we have working groups. And this brings people together to work on something that they have an interest in, a passion for. So we are working with carriers today to talk to them about what are some of the new applications that you would like to see that would solve problems. So for example, we know that we need a new flood program for the private market. So how do we do that? Well, everybody knows we're going to need data, we're going to need reports, we're going to need some sort of tracking. We need to rely on data that doesn't come from carriers. Maybe, we might need FEMA data, we might need data from modeling companies. So we have a working group that has come together to look at how we would support a private flood product and what would be needed for the industry to do that, and how would we build that on top of the openIDL. In this same collaborative manner, we worked with the Hartford. They said, we'd really like to look at this platform and understand it. There may be other things that we'd like to do with this platform. So they had the openIDL for 90 days. They went through every line of source code. They were able to load their own data. And now they have some ideas about where the openIDL should go. That's because we're open and transparent. And what we want is our really creative people to see where this can go that we haven't thought of. MOBI, RMS, Cat Risk, the flood working group is not chaired by AAIS. It's chaired by Cat Risk, a staff member from Cat Risk, and the co-chair is from RMS. And we've also talked to MOBI. They have a whole standards organization that's looking at how we're going to collect data from the auto industry. None of us are going to be experts in that, not AAIS, not a carrier, right? So how do we work with MOBI? How do we link what we're doing in the insurance industry to what they're doing in the auto industry and begin to leverage a lot of that data that's going to be generated? We're doing that through working groups, collaboration, always open, transparent. If you have a passion for it, come in and help us build it.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about our use case around statistical reporting. What were some of the key elements as we look, and the people we've worked with, like the departments and the NEIC coming in for design thinking? What were some of the elements that started to come up around how this would work in the future, and would we even be a part of it?
Yep. Well, hopefully, we're going to disintermediate ourselves. That's actually one of the things we learned, is that for regulatory reporting, one of the things that first popped out was that proprietary stat plans that have been around for 80 years it came about when we were doing things on paper and then on mainframes, and really haven't changed a whole lot. And they're not very useful to the carriers. Those stat reporting plans are not useful. So what we need is a data strategy for the industry that starts with modern data models and standards. Right? So let's stop thinking about the way we did these very strange fixed field stat plans from 80 years ago, and let's build something that's usable. Let's have a data standard that matches data warehouses, that helps carriers very quickly get their data into a repository that we can all use, because there's data inside insurance organizations that regulators may need and carriers would like to share, but we can't just we have to think ahead. We have to have that data there so that when the legislature calls, we say, yes, we have that data. And sometimes we're going to have to say, no, we don't have it, but then we can build it into the data model. So it's really important that this data model be owned by the industry as a whole, and that it's flexible and it's extendable, so as new requests come forward, we do it once. We add it to the data model, the data goes in from all the carriers, and we know we can rely on it the next time a data call comes in, say 18 months from now.
So that kind of moves us into the bigger picture why around the industry data standard. And I know the commissioner mentioned that. And I think that many times, I mean, depends upon the carrier we're talking to as to whether they feel like statistical data is a problem for them or hard for them, or in the grand scheme of what they're doing that important. But there's a lot of capability that comes beyond when you're looking, and that's what we're going to ask you to do today, is kind of open your mind to the things you are experiencing and how that relates to really more of a data strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about data strategy for the industry.
Yeah, oh, and I don't want to leave, the last two items on that was the NEIC and the regulators.
Right.
Just really want to make sure that, we go back to the community. And one of the extension points, and that's why we have members from the NEIC here, is that there's a lot of reporting that's done outside of advisory organizations. So just like the standards bodies, we are hoping this platform can be used by all of the reporting entities in the insurance industry, state regulators, the NEIC, so that the carriers can help us build one data strategy and we all rely upon it.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about a data strategy for the industry, because we don't have one really, folks. we have pieces of it that now really need to come together, and we need to be collaborative in how we move to the next stage. So let's talk a little bit about data strategy.
Yep. So very often when we think about data strategy, if you were to ask that inside most organizations, they say, yes, we have a data strategy. We have a way that we collect data in from all of our systems, and we clean it, and we have governance over it, and we put it in a format that we really trust that it's usable and we all understand it. We have common data definitions. That's an internal data strategy, sometimes referred to as a defensive data strategy, and it's something that we've been working on for years now. Every organization has some version of a data warehouse, and they expend a lot of effort to make sure that it's a really strong reporting platform. But as we've seen over certainly the last 10 years and going forward, that the insurance industry is going to change, is that it's data outside of that defensive data strategy that's going to impact organizations a lot. And that is sometimes referred to as an offensive data strategy. Is what is your strategy for looking outside of your four walls, understanding the data that's now available externally, how you're going to use that with your internal data to improve your products, to improve your market, how you understand your market, how you just help your customers work with you. And that's really a tough area for most people to develop a strategy. If you were to ask most folks, they say, well, today I know that our modeling companies, I have to provide data in a certain format, and I do. And we're looking at IoT vendors for homeowners' data to complement our product, but they all have different standards. So if I'm going to work with Roost, I've got one data standard. If I'm going to work with Moby, I've got another one. And now all of a sudden I'm setting up connections to 1,000 different companies with different standards. And it becomes very difficult to think about how you're going to manage your data in that world. That's not a strategy. It's reactionary, right? It's just like I've got yet another call for data, and my technical folks have to figure out how to deal with it. So an external data strategy or an offensive data strategy looks at how would we as an industry solve that problem and create a strategy, not a reactionary response to this. Some of the differences between the two strategies, are shown in this table here. But flexibility is at the core of an external data strategy, an offensive data strategy, and an idea of multiple versions of the truth. Right? So if you think about the data that you collect today and manage, you're really trying to provide one version of the truth. This is a policy. This is the premium, this, that version of the truth. What happens when you have an external data strategy that begins to bring in additional data from modeling companies or from IoT data vendors or wherever that data may come from, they're beginning to provide insight to your data that you otherwise would not have. And if you think about modeling companies, they definitely provide multiple versions of the truth, right? You have your policy and claims data, but what they tell you about the risks around that data are very different between the various modeling companies. And so there needs to be a way to try to manage, how we connect the data elements together, deal with multiple versions of the truth. And so with that is why we looked at, as an industry, we're uniquely positioned to have a common offensive data strategy that comes together through data standards and through a common platform in which we could share data and bring many players from the industry to help us link that together in the most efficient way possible.
So let's start to wrap it up here with some key takeaways from Joan's part of the discussion. So I'll let you just kind of roll on that. From my perspective, and what I hope kind of permeates through design thinking is this is about changing the way we work together. It's about changing our data strategy. It's a unique position to be in. We could be leaders in how this moves forward across the internet. The insurance industry already has a mechanism to create an external data strategy, and we just need to grab a hold of it and kind of drive that forward. The defensive data strategy is critical to this. So everything everyone is doing here in terms of creating their own internal data strategies and data repositories, those are still really important. But we may change the way we think about how we use external data, how we bring those data elements together, if we think about a different external data strategy, right? So today, if we were just to think about it from our internal perspective, we say, I need to collect more data. I need to bring it into my data warehouse. I need to fill up this huge room full of data. But if we have an external data strategy potentially built upon an open network, we may say, the better way to do that might be to allow everybody to do what they do really well and have a different way for us to communicate information or exchange data across this network. So that's one kind of big idea that we're hoping that everybody will open up to and think about as part of design thinking. And then hopefully a takeaway and something that is incorporated in all of this is AAIS as the facilitator of all this. We are an advisory organization. We exist because of you. We have a business model. There are many business models that could exist for an advisory organization. Ours is a unique business model in that we are looking at ourselves as a facilitator. We are willing to disintermediate ourselves if we shouldn't be doing stat reporting going forward because openIDL can automate it. We should stop doing that. We shouldn't try to just hold on to it because we've done it for 80 years. We're ready to let it go because there's so many other things that we need to do on top of that. And we hope to provide leadership in the openIDL around regulatory reporting. But what would really make us happy is that all of the people we've interacted with in design thinking that have really great ideas that we never could have had on our own, you take those and you run with them. And that you start to build things on top of the openIDL, things that we never would have thought of that bring value to communities that we don't serve today. So hopefully that's the platform. Great. Well, thank you, Joan. So I'm going to kind of poll you guys. Do you want 5 minutes for the coffee bio break? Okay.
Should we just do a quick round of introductions just to get names for everybody? Because I know we don't have name tags or anything like that, just to make sure everybody's aware of who we have.
Okay.
We didn't circulate the attendee list, I don't think.
No, we did not.
So
We can do that. Okay, we can do that now if you want to do that. And
I want to call on people.
you, Truman's going to have the professor grilling here in a few minutes.
I'm not sure I remember them all, but is there a way for us to do that for you to know who's here and
No, I like, mostly for the benefit of everybody here, we've got a lot of carriers here, we've got a lot of regulators here, folks that have been involved with openIDL, as you mentioned from the beginning, folks that this is their first time and first exposure, not only to openIDL, but to blockchain. I want to make sure that we're able to bring everybody with us.
Well,
and
how
so
about a
we
couple
can-
of questions? Because I also
Yeah.
didn't open it up to that. I want to make sure anybody has questions for me.
Oh, yeah,
can,
that's
but
fine.
So, carriers? And regulators? You've been to design thinking before?
Okay.
Yep. You knew who AIS was 6 months ago? You?
Thank you for your honesty.
All right. Any questions about anything that I talked about or, this, yep.
Yeah, I guess question. So what role does blockchain play in openIDL? Why is it needed?
So I'll talk about that at a high level, and then Truman will talk to it in detail in terms of the technology. But I'm hoping that it's not something that you have to think about much, but it's providing some key services underneath the cover. So blockchain is a technology, but it has to be configured. It has to be put together with other pieces of software and systems into an architecture, into a configuration. When you do that, you get very different applications that come out of it. So there isn't one blockchain technology. If you were to think about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, we're not even close to that. We don't have anything to do with that world. There is a blockchain technology over there, but the way they use it, we don't use it over there.
But one day tokenization might be important to us.
It might be.
And we will
But-
talk to their stuff at that point and
Once
figure
it
that
becomes
out.
real, right
Yeah.
now it's all just kind of hand waving.
Yeah, but for us, when we looked at blockchain, we said, why do we care about this? And we cared because of what we heard, and I really can't state this strongly enough, what we heard from our design thinking participants, right? So the carriers want control over their data. They're really tired of sending mass quantities of data out to advisory organizations, to modeling companies. They said, we don't know where our data's going. You know, we get all these people who want our data. It leaves our data center where we're responsible for security. And then we don't know how it ends up in other products, under other services and reports. We have no insight into that. It just doesn't feel good. So we said, okay, bringing control of that data back inside the data center of the carrier was a key requirement. Could we do that with blockchain? Well, we said, yes, if that's a key feature, we can design a blockchain solution that has that feature. It's not inherent in the technology itself, but it can support it. Something else that we knew is that in the insurance industry, because of antitrust, we can't share that data out on a blockchain network. Right? So we can't, if you look at some blockchain technologies, that data gets shared between every node on the network. So we knew that whatever we built couldn't do that, couldn't share that raw data out on the network. So we worked on a solution that doesn't share the data, but shares evidence of the data on it, unique to the insurance industry, evidence of the data, not the data itself. We could do that inside the insurance industry. Transparency. So what data exists in the network? How is it being requested? How is it being used? What is the outcome of using that data? Carriers want to see that. They want some audit trail of how a regulator or an advisory organization or a modeling company or whoever, how did they access my data? How did they use it? Is there some benefit that I should get out of having that data used? Show me how I track that over time and I can take advantage of that. I want that transparency in what's happening with my data. I want that audit trail. That was very important to the carriers and the regulators both. The regulators have a responsibility to ensure that the carriers are reporting according to the regulations. The carriers want to know, they want an audit trail of what's happened to their data. So those are really important features of what we had to build. So then if you look at blockchain technology, which is just a ledger, right? We say, how do we do that? Well, we're going to allow the carriers to build their own defensive data strategy and data warehouses, and we'll use the blockchain network to put evidence of that data out there. Excuse me, I need some water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I'll let Truman fill it in.
Like Joan said, it is just a ledger, right? The key, what blockchain brings is the integrity of that data, the immutability of that data, and ultimately what we're trying to build is a transparent, accountable system that we can trust. Right? As the commissioner said before, the data that goes into the system is, the system is only valuable as the data that goes into it. Right now, from a regulator's perspective, all the data is coming in from the carriers and only being used for that regulatory purpose, right? If it's only being used, you're getting served a glass of water, if you will, but it's only being used for that purpose. You have very little, accountability to that or trust in that. That you don't know where it came from, you don't know where else that water is being used for. But if that data that's being used to generate regulatory reporting information is also being used to pay commissions, monitor claims, move capital around based on outstanding policies, you can trust that question that's coming back to the regulator or that glass of water that's being served from you from that common well much more. And that's really kind of the idea that we're getting to here. We're much more of a conduit of data across the industry that can be tapped into by different folks in the industry, both carriers, partners, from reinsurers, brokers, agents, as well as regulators, friendly neighborhood advisory organizations to help move the industry forward, but only in a way that keeps the data private and uses it and is used by the data owner to serve your interest and your goals, and to do so in a transparent but not showing the private data, but accountable way, right? So your policy data, your policies aren't being revealed, but to the question earlier that the commissioner asked, how many family daycare policies or home daycare policies are in force? That's not going to reveal any carrier's unique information or where those policies are. But it'd be great to know over 2017, 18, and 19 what have the changes been in that marketplace? What is the average insured value? What kind of claims experience has been? If it's doubling or tripling in the last couple of years as a regulatory policy, we better do something. Our kids are in these places.
Yeah. So I want to follow up on that a little bit. I'm a member of Florida's blockchain task force. I was appointed by Speaker Oliva in Florida. And one of the things that came up at our last task force meeting was, well, why is this blockchain thing important to any of us? And I think one of the most interesting statistics was that over the last 4 years, right, you've seen a real movement in industry now that we're starting to get over the Bitcoin hype, right? We all have equated blockchain to what Bitcoin is, and Bitcoin is only a little piece. But you're starting to see many, many more. And so the question kind of came from one of the panelists, well, how many successful things are out there right now? And the answer to that is everybody's in the same place we're in, pretty much. They're starting to test this idea. But what you're starting to see is some very powerful results, and I'll give you one. IBM also has a little thing called Food Trust. Okay, so anybody here get sick from lettuce from Chipotle, and anybody own stock in Chipotle? Because that was pretty bad a couple of years ago when you saw the supply chain was very disrupted by tainted lettuce, right? Well, you had a major player in Walmart, and Walmart said, we have to figure out where our produce is coming from. This is not going to work real well for us. We don't want our customers getting sick. So they started working on this blockchain technology and have developed what they call Food Trust. And it's a consortium. Just as we're a consortium in the insurance industry, it's a consortium of large wholesale and retail outlets like Walmart and Kroger and others. Well, because Walmart's such a big boy in this area, they're able to drive this. So basically, they said, if you want to do business with Walmart, Kraft and all, and so Dole is in there's a commercial. I don't know if you guys get it here, but Dole actually has a commercial on on their participation now in food trust, but Walmart was pretty much the leader in that. But eventually it's brought in pretty much everybody in that retail space, and they say, basically, if you want to sell to us and you want your product in our stores, you will participate in this blockchain. What that means is that things like the source of contamination can be tracked back within minutes. What took almost, 6 months of figuring out where the tainted lettuce came from for the Chipotle experience happens in minutes. And what it is that block of produce, as it's leaving the farm, is monitored by technology, sensor technology, and trucks and intermodal transport. And basically, every place that head of lettuce in that crate moves from is tracked in a blockchain technology. And it allows the instant access and backwards look at where that particular thing came from. Another one that's going on in the world is around diamonds. You have folks who in the diamond mining business because of the tragedies that we've seen around diamond mining and other things. There's a lot of regulatory environment for them. So the entire flow of when a chunk of stuff came out of the ground and they actually ored it and they were able to create and make diamonds, and some of it's industrial diamonds, not just glittery, pretty bling like I like. But all of that entire process is now happening on a blockchain. Europe and Africa and other continents are ahead of us. The United States lags very behind in blockchain, but we're starting to catch up. And I like to always give this example because it's a really good, to me, it's really makes you think. Okay. Everybody has one of these, right? Nobody's still on their flip phone. Do you ever watch Netflix and watch maybe something from 1999 or 2000? This did not exist 11 years ago. Okay? Smartphones weren't real. And nobody asked anybody, what would you like in a smartphone? Apple did not go out and test what they were doing by asking, do you want a smartphone? Nobody would have known what that was. And if you'd have asked Henry Ford, if he'd have gone out and asked his customers, people would have said they want a faster horse, okay? People would have wanted a faster network on their flip phones. They wouldn't have asked for this, right? This is 11 years old. Think about that. And how much you use it now. You bank on it. You find information on it. I've seen everybody working on one at some point during this day. You are in constant contact with work, email, you name it, we do it on these phones. I order pretty much every bit of my pet food on this phone, right? It comes to my house through Amazon. So just think about the growth and the activity in 11 years, what this meant in our lives. Some good, some bad. Blockchain's the same thing, and that's the why. Why do you want to use a network like this? Because it will be this revolutionary. And other people are already discovering that, and more so outside of the United States than here. But it's the growth is phenomenal in people starting to build these use cases and these consortiums. Key to it, consortium. You've got to put a network of people together. Some people can force that, like a Walmart. But some people can walk in and say, "Hey, we're a community. Let's start talking about how that consortium forms and goes forward." All right, so now's a really great time to let's break. When we come back, we'll do everybody introduce themselves and tell one interesting thing about yourself.